You had who was it? Chris Walker. Who was the other artillery officer they had on the guides on the TV shows now?
Yeah, Walker.
Yeah, he was talking about like how it's so important to have battery time, um, as a younger officer in order to have be a, you can't just stay on the hill the whole time. You can't be, and the benefits or the pros and cons of creating, like, should fire sport be its own MOS? Like, if I didn't have that
Hmm.
time as a fire direction officer, as a lieutenant, I would have never been able to be a really effective battery commander because I wouldn't have understood anything that happened, in the battery position.
Yeah, you have to understand the machine and how
Got
it
to know what's
works if
going
you're going to be
on.
in charge of it,
Yeah,
for
right,
sure.
right.
I
And
I
that's
like I like the idea of having a separate. I don't really fully understand why we don't have like an observer kind of unit rather than just attach us to artillery. Because when I was at 210, and I've talked to other guys that kind of feel the same way. You're like the bastard child of artillery, right? You're no
yeah.
one. No one at the artillery battalion really cares about the observers, right? It's all about the guns. The guns are shooting, and I don't mean that like
No, I get it. Yeah.
they care, but they don't
Hmm.
care. Like the focus of training is on the guns,
Hmm.
and because you're not gonna deploy with your artillery unit more than likely. They're a supporting unit for somebody else. You're gonna deploy with somebody else, which you run into the problem then. Like me, I get attached to 3.6. Well, nobody at 3.6 cares about you either. You're an attachment. You're some pogue attachment that's here,
Right.
and sometimes it's tough for scouts at artillery units to justify or to get their units to pay for some training, some not outside of the normal artillery world. Like I wanted to send one of my scouts to the Summer Mountain Leaders course at Bridgeport. And man, it took me like an hour of talking to the ops chief, like convincing him why I should get the unit to pay for a guy to go to training, that the unit's never going to benefit from it because he's going to deploy with an infantry
Yeah.
battalion, and they're the ones that are going to receive the benefit from it. And I see the argument for having a separate unit, kind of like an Anglo, I guess, that are just observers, where they can focus on their own training, they get their own funding. Like, it's all, I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts of that are as
I
an
mean,
officer, as an
you just
artillery
you
officer.
just you just made me think of something, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this yet. But let's. It would be interesting to kind of think through this. What's going to happen to the observer fire support community when we invert the equipment to rockets? Like, the Ford observers aren't bracketing rockets,
No.
right? They're getting like high order 10-digit grids, right? They're getting
Yeah.
target, right? So maybe they haven't thought through this yet, but maybe somebody's going to stand up and say, like, all right, well, what are we going to do with the 0861 community? Like, we still have to have them, but if they're only going to be at the firing battalion levels and we're only going to have 5 batteries total, maybe we should pull the whole 0861 community up into the Anglico community, create a more broader mission set for the Anglico community, and when one of those howitzer batteries goes out to the field, or an infantry unit needs an observer, they're sourcing those from a centralized unit like Anglico. I mean, maybe, again, that just came to
No,
my head
I
in
get
a
it.
second.
It's kind of like being at Anglico and being like, hey, we need to go to the field next week. Call up find out what squadron can support us. It'd be the same way. Hey, call up the observer, see if they got guys available for next week for a field op or
Yeah.
whatever. I don't know. There's that traditional command and control relationships, where if you're like 210 or if you're at you're at 6 Marines, generally you're sporting 6 Marines, stuff like that. I mean, you're going to lose some of that. With already going to rockets, what is going to happen with 6
There's
ones?
no
Because
there's no such thing as, like, I mean, those 2 batteries are going to pick up the traditional infantry, massing fires to allow an infantry unit to maneuver, or in the defense, like that's going to be, but like the rocket I mean, the whole idea of a linear battlefield is just, I think, is becoming, dismissed, as we,
what if
progress.
what if instead of sending everyone to like Anglico, you take the guys that would normally be at your artillery battalion, your fire support guys, your observers, and they just go to the infantry battalions, and now you're part of
You could do that
weapons
too.
company. You're part
Yeah.
of weapons company as a observer there all the time. So now you have a school trained observer that can school up their mortar observers, because their mortar observers are OJT. They don't go to
Yeah.
any formal schooling. It's, hey, bro, here's a set of binoculars. Say this, say this. Okay, hey, you're an observer now. Congrats.
Right.
Obviously there's more to it than that, but only if that individual that's training the other guys takes the time to give them that good training. I can see the argument for having 6-1s that are permanently with an infantry unit, and then, I mean, that seems the most logical thing to me because that's who you're normally going to deploy with.
Yep.
You know, I just don't see. I didn't really think about it until you said it about, hey, rockets are going to be taken over, so who's going to be the observers for that? But because it's a 6-1, you're not getting any training when you're out shooting. What do they call them? The Ripper rounds from the HIMARS, the training rounds, because they don't actually hit the target. They don't actually go to the impact point. They just, you feed them a bunch of information, then they launch that telephone pole, then it just kind of goes wherever. It goes in a general area, but it's not going to the actual
it's not
target.
Guided.
So
it's got no guidance.
So where's the training value there? I don't know, man.
I wonder. It could be, and I haven't seen any sort of like layout about how the artillery community is going to be restructured. But I got to imagine that they're probably not going to take away the regimental headquarters, right? They're still going to have a billet for a colonel to be a regimental commander in the artillery community, or otherwise the artillery officer community just won't exist.
Yeah.
So let's assume that they would keep the regiments, and maybe what they'll do is they'll say like, okay, 111, 211, and 511, or 111, 211, and 511 are now rocket battalions, and 311 is going to be a 2 battalion because they're up in 29 pounds. So it's easier, or maybe they invert that. I don't know, but maybe the observers are part of headquarters battery now. Like maybe they
regiment. Everybody's at regiment headquarters,
right? And then farm that. That way, they're still in the artillery community. I would worry about, from a career progression standpoint, what would happen to a bunch of sergeants and staff sergeants and maybe even gunnies who reside at the infantry community as 0861s with career fitness reports. Like,
yeah, I mean that's an issue that you would have to be addressed, I guess. But
yeah, but I see what you're saying.
For me, my whole point, my thinking is, where can you send someone where they're going to get the best training, and to a unit that's going to see the value in sending guys to Mountain Com, Summer Mountain Leaders course, going through different like foreign weapons instructor course, stuff like that. The outside the box kind of training that makes you overall a better Marine, but just even a better asset as a 6-1 going to support an infantry battalion, going to a combat zone. I don't know. It's a weird world, I guess. Old guys like you and I, we're just sit to the side and kind of watch them figure it out and see what they do.
At least we're not tankers.
I was going to say, as a former